mean, obviously as a Glasgow member, you know, was looking for particular issues that I wanted to spend some time working on during this session that were Glasgow specific, and the bus service in Glasgow is appalling in lots and lots of ways. It's unreliable, it's expensive, it's dirty, there's a very, very bad culture in terms of changing and cutting services without consulting passengers, and I think there's a you know, pretty broad feeling of people being a bit fed up with it. It's also a city where most households still don't have access to a car, so huge numbers of people are still relying on bus services every day. And as a large, compact city, it should be ideal for a really excellent public transport system. Obviously, there's slightly different kind of context in some of the rural areas. Public transport is still hugely important, but in a city, it should be a pretty easy thing to do. By and large, what happens is whichever party is in opposition calls for re-regulation of the buses. That doesn't necessarily mean just going back to before deregulation in 1985 and just having exactly what went before that, but it means some kind of tighter regulatory regime, some kind of greater constraint, moving it away from being a purely free market back to being a public service. And there's different models of how you would achieve that. Whichever of the main parties is in opposition calls for some form of re-regulation, and whichever party is in government says, oh, it's too expensive, we can't do that, here are all the reasons why. And then if they swap positions, they swap their viewpoint on buses. So my kind of judgment was that dynamic is never going to change until bus passengers are a more powerful voice. Bus passengers have got nobody really to represent them. Even some of the kind of passenger-focused type work that happens in England and Wales, UK government funds, the Scottish government doesn't fund it, so we can't produce comparative data about how satisfied people are with the service between Scottish bus companies and those elsewhere, or even between different Scottish bus companies. So we don't have that data about how satisfied or dissatisfied people are with the service. There's no regulator, as I said. There's also no powerful lobby group acting on behalf of bus passengers. The motorist has got very, very powerful lobbyists working on their behalf. Rail passengers have got a regulated service, and they've also got you know, better representation in terms of, you know, rail users' bodies and consultative forums and all the rest of it. And bus passengers get nothing. So what I wanted to do was not just come out with a proposal, you know, another politician coming out with another, you know, member's bill or proposal about another flavour of regulation, but to do a piece of work that would connect with passengers and collect together their viewpoints, their perspectives, their kind of first-person experiences, but also try and galvanise that group into being a campaign rather than it being me or the Green Party, that it's a bigger group of voices. Yeah, we've generated a reasonable amount of participation through the site and on social media. So, for example, if I'm going to meet with First Glasgow, I can tweet that I'm on my way to go and meet with them when I'm on the bus to go to the meeting. And by the time I get there, I've got 20 or 30 people getting back to me saying, you know, something from that day about what was not right about the bus service, or what they think should be improved, or what the priorities are that I should be raising in the meeting. So it really strengthens my hand when I'm going in. I can talk not just about something abstract or theoretical, but, you know, a couple of dozen people's direct experiences. We produced, as I said, one sort of interim report, sort of summarising where we got to. Did a response to the recent first consultation on the redesign of their bus routes. And I think, you know, the idea has got to be to try and change the political landscape a bit, try and make sure that, you know, it's not going to happen in the current session of Parliament, partly because the SNP have a majority and they don't need to do it, and, you know, they're reluctant to do anything in the area of re-regulation. But in the next session, I'd like to get to the point where all the major political parties have got something to say in their manifestos for the next election about whether they call it re-regulation or not, improving bus services and turning them back into a public service instead of just a free market. I don't expect all of them to phrase it that way either, but something in this area. And if there's enough sort of common ground, and I think there is. One constant problem with Scottish politics at the moment is stuff that Labour and the SNP actually agree on, or 80% of their members and MSPs and so on agree on, and yet they can't act just because of the mutual hostility and mistrust there is between them as tribes. And this is similar. There are folk in both parties who've been campaigning for bus regulation for years and want to improve the situation. So I think if we can get to the point where the next election there's enough of a sense of momentum that there's a public demand for something to be improved, then if they've all got something, or at least Labour, the SNP and ourselves, maybe the Lib Dems might say something on it as well. If there's enough of a sense of momentum that something is due, that something's going to happen, then there's a chance that we'll have cleared the ground for some kind of legislative action. And the bus companies, even First and Stagecoach and all that, these are big companies. They operate in a lot of countries. They know that they can turn a buck in regulated markets and unregulated markets. It's not the end of the world for them. And I think, I'd love it if we could, if we could have public operated bus services, and if there was a genuine political change. If you think about the M74 extension, it's not just that we were opposed to it in environmental terms. It's a huge opportunity cost. For the cost of that, for the price of that 5 miles of motorway, you could have had the Glasgow Airport rail link, refurbished subway, the Glasgow Crossrail. You could have bought a new fleet of buses, bought with public money, so you own them and you can afford a fully re-regulated service. You could have had an Oyster card style scheme to make it all join up properly. You could have repaired every pothole in Glasgow and had the biggest investment we've ever seen in cycling infrastructure as well. All of that you could have done for the price of 5 miles of motorway. So if the will was there, the money's there in the road building programme year after year after year. It's an area where we are still spending a lot of money on the capital side. If you were willing to spend capital money on publicly owned buses, publicly owned fleet, you'd be able to run a publicly run service, a public bus company. I think that's much less likely given the political lie of the land with the bigger parties, but at the very least, some degree of additional subsidy, because I came here on the train from Edinburgh first of all, and then to East Kilbride from Glasgow, and every railway ticket you buy carries a taxpayer subsidy. The reason why rail fares are what they are and the service is what it is that there's something like a 70% or thereabouts subsidy. There is an argument for what the SNP have done with the bus service operators grant. It shouldn't just be a subsidy for burning petrol. It should be about trying to ensure that you've got good quality services getting that subsidy. But the fact is the scale of that subsidy is really, really small compared with the railways. Now, I'm not someone who thinks subsidy is a bad thing. I think subsidy is a great thing. I think if there are some things that we're better off as a society when we pay for them collectively, we should do that. And public transport is a really obvious example. But however you reconfigured the bus service operators grant, it's still a very small pot of money compared with the subsidies for railways. The distinction between profitable and unprofitable routes is, that's defined by how much subsidy we choose to put in the first place. There's always going to be a debate between government and the industry about the concessionary scheme and whether it's fully funded and whether it's meeting their costs. In reality, the taxpayer is generating demand as well as paying for that demand. and so we're paying for a substantial proportion of the journeys that are taken on buses. That's true. But the industry is going to be thinking about the paying passengers, is going to be thinking about, and to be fair, they have had a tough time over the recession. Bus services have suffered quite badly, and the sort of discretionary journeys, the journeys you don't need to make, have been hit quite badly. Even if people are moving from the car to public transport some of the time to commute, that's more than offset by the loss of discretionary journeys. And so the industry's it's not been easy. But I suspect that if government was to say, here is the standard of service we expect, we're going to regulate for that, and in exchange we're going to make sure that there is a decent level of subsidy for this service so that it's affordable for people, I think the industry would be perfectly happy to accept that deal, even if we weren't able to get into a debate about publicly operated services. The private companies know that they can work with an arrangement like that they've got a subsidised service, they know that they've got an income stream, and they've got a clear set of expectations about what the state, what the public expects of the standard of the service. So I think it's achievable, I think it's affordable, and I think it's in people's interests, and it's just needing to break the kind of political logjam. And I personally still think the only thing that can achieve that is a bigger voice for passengers. It's for passengers speaking collectively, and therefore a bit more forcefully and with a louder voice. In my last job, I was based in Glasgow, and from initially having a Glasgow focus, I was moved sideways, and I got the Lanarkshire Health Board area to cover. And so the office was still in Glasgow, but I had to go out to meetings in Hamilton and Motherwell and further down into South Lanarkshire as well. And the charity had to pay for driving licence because it's just impossible. You can just about get from Glasgow to one bit of Lanarkshire and back, but if you're trying to get between different bits of Lanarkshire and public transport, you'd be spending all day.
Well, I've had Stagecoach come out from their Dumfries depot to visit me for a meeting, and they couldn't get the bus because the bus service wasn't good enough for them to get back in the work. And it's in the bus company.
That doesn't surprise me.
There's only there's only like 2 buses. I live in Motherwell. Try to get to Glasgow. There's one bus that's express bus, which is fine, but it's only every half an hour, and on a Sunday it's like every 2 hours. And then the other one goes through like Parkheads and all that, and it's like it's away. So you take the train, but then it costs too much, and you have to walk all the way up the hill to get a train through it, and it's like so it'd be better to get more buses.
Or at the very least integration, so that you can get the one ticket that gets you the bus to the train station.
Something. You can get like a zone card, and that costs like £1.5 a year for 5 zones, because I had to get it for college.
Well, I mean, those kind of deals are appallingly bad value compared with a lot of European countries. You can get an annual ticket just for the Glasgow to Edinburgh rail service, and that costs you more than an annual ticket for the entire German public transport network. Buses, trains, trams, trams within loads of cities. So, the idea that one service, Glasgow to Edinburgh, costs you more than an entire country, which is a dramatically bigger country than Scotland. It just shows the gulf in prices, and I think that's similar in bus as well as train, that there's a culture of just expensive, for most of my lifetime, barring the odd little oil price spike, the overall cost of owning and running a car has stayed pretty much the same, pretty much level in real terms, which means it's more affordable. And the overall cost of public transport has gone up and up and up and up in real terms. So that it's a lot less affordable, even if you assume that incomes are kind of roughly comparable. So, we need to turn that around for a decade or more and start shifting the numbers in the other direction. And I don't think it can happen without
sometimes
something.
it's choosing whether it's faster to go somewhere or cheaper. My boyfriend's from Dumbarton, from out your way, and he was going to work in Edinburgh, like just for a meeting, and it cost him £36 on the train just to get there single because he was staying overnight. I was like, I could have taken a bus for a tenner, but it would have taken me about 3 hours to get there.
Whereas honest, if you stand on one foot and it's a Wednesday and you know, it happens to be raining, then you could get a ticket for 50p, and if you know, otherwise it's £240 to go away.
It's cheaper for him to get a ticket to me in Motherwell, and then Motherwell station do cheaper tickets to Edinburgh, so you can take a train. It would have taken longer, because it's like an hour and a half to 9, and then it'd take him another hour for £1. But he had to just go straight. And I was
They've got a lot of things like student rail cards as well,
yeah,
which you can't use till after 10 o'clock in the morning.
Absolutely.
And you use it before 10 o'clock in the morning during the summer holidays, so it's no use when you're a student.
Yeah.
It's just you're not a student.
What happens when an essential route is proposed to be cut, like the 31 and First Bus? I don't know what obligations First Bus, are there any obligations of them to run essential routes?
It's up, if something like that's going to be cut, it's up to SPT whether they're going to subsidise it or take it over. So the 29 is one that goes past me now, and it's still, I think, being operated by First, but with vehicles provided by SPT.
Yeah, SPT seem to quite like that model, but I'm not sure all the operators do, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, at least it means the thing is still going, but it's, even that is confusing for people, you know, like a lot of people, I've got a first bus 4 weekly pass. So does that work on an SPT bus? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know the first couple of times I let one sail past me, you know. But a lot of people just would assume that it's going to have to be a First branded bus if I'm going to use my First ticket on it. Actually, you can use it, but it's not clear to people. So, I mean, there's a few other gripes beyond things just getting scrapped. I mean, one of the common complaints that we've had is about buses which have one number but several different routes. So it goes through the city centre on the same route, and then it goes to different destinations. And so,
does that.
right, okay.
So I've done that.
And
Definition.
and you know, if you know the end destination and you read it on the front, and you happen to know where that is, then you can work out whether that one's going through the stop you want to go to. But not everybody knows. Even in a single city, not everyone knows where all these endpoints are and the peripheries and the outlying areas in the city. So you're taking pot luck sometimes. And umpteen times I've been on the 23 where the point where it diverges and half the people are saying, oh, where's it going? And they get off the bus at that point and walk back to the stop. And it looks as though the new set of route proposals from First are going to see a lot more of that because they want there to be fewer numbers. And so if you have two routes that are going through the city centre, or have some element of the shared route, but at the moment they're different numbers, and you give them the same number, then you can say it's a 10-minute service instead of a 20-minute service
Within the city centre, but
yeah,
not
for part of the route,
yeah,
it is
yeah,
a more frequent service
yeah.
because it's one number instead of two.
Yeah.
But actually, it's the same service. Mentioned Glasgow city centre. If you took Renfield Street in particular, which is a real nightmare in the rush hour, and you turned it effectively the bottom part of it. Was it turned into Union Street? That part of it, you effectively turn that into an on-road bus station. You know, if you think about the number of buses that are going through there, it's a busier bus station than almost anything in Scotland. If you thought of it as a bus station with stances on both sides of the road, then and a kind of route through the middle, it could work much more efficiently. It would mean annoying lots of taxi drivers, but there's plenty of other places where taxi stances can let them pick up, and it would mean, at least for some of the time, that you would have to say cars will find another route, particularly in the really, really busy rush hours in the morning and evening. If you were to do that, it could make the city centre a much more efficient kind of throughput. So on average, rail users are more affluent. They're getting a bigger subsidy, and I think there's a good case for saying that bus services are going to meet social need as well as environmental objectives if we subsidise them a bit more. And frankly, I think the benefit of that is enough for me to ignore the fact that there'll be a handful of people, myself included, who use the bus who could afford to pay more. I'd rather pay for it through taxation than paying more on the fares, because I think if we pay more on the fares and less on taxation, we'll still end up with a less decent service. I mean, there's a wider debate to be had about universal benefits, and I still think there's a really important value in universalism in a range of different benefits. And it's not about freebie, it's not about anything being free, it's about society choosing to pay collectively through taxation rather than pay individually. And there are wealthy people whose children get educated at taxpayers' expense. There are wealthy people who go to hospital at taxpayers' expense, and we're better as a society because we do those things collectively. And public transport, I think, will work better if we pay for it collectively rather than only individually. You know, I don't suggest that you do away with fares altogether in the way the SSP suggests, because I think that genuinely would drive up demand far faster than the infrastructure could cope. You know, who knows, one day you might be able to get to something like that on a purely kind of socialistic basis for public transport, but I think it's unrealistic in the short term. But a degree of subsidy for buses that's comparable to what we do for trains would make the system work.
So what's the difference in percentages, Patrick? Is it 70%?
Oh, for the majority of bus services, there's no subsidy at all. I mean, you talk about the bus services operators grant.
Yeah.
That's a fairly small subsidy, but that's about the overall running cost of the service. It's not about subsidising the tickets.
To what degrees is like
the overall
£3 or something to get to Glasgow?
The railways overall, it's something like 3/4 of the cost is met by the public purse.
So
instead of
not
the
should be
fare
about
rate.
12 quid to get to Glasgow on a train. So East Kilbride to Glasgow would be
If you were paying the full
The full
cost
price,
at the ticket,
Okay.
yeah,
Mhm.
something like that.
So if you had that same sort of subsidy on the buses, it would be about 60 pence or something, 50p.
At least getting closer to that, at least
Yeah.
levelling the playing
Mhm.
field a bit.
Yeah.
You know. But you know, I think the industry would cope with regulation so long as they knew that the services they were expecting to run to a certain standard, and so they're being given the cost that makes that commercially viable for them as businesses. And from the passenger's point of view, you get a better service and a reasonable price, an affordable service.